So I finished playing The Last of Us 2 recently, and, Naughty Dog have gone through this massive change since the first Last of Us came out 7 years ago, implementing their new serious studio motif sort of thing into the next Uncharted games that came out after it. And now, the culmination of years of work and the rebranding as this technical, mature powerhouse has culminated in the fruition of The Last of Us 2, a grim, gritty, gross video game that I continually ask myself, was all this worth it? The game is split into two. You take the role of Ellie 4 years after Joel massacres a hospital looking for a cure, where an immune Ellie would have been the key to saving the human race. It would have killed her, and so Joel decided that he couldn't lose another daughter, thus giving the only real memorable moment in the game, and the grey area to allow players to latch onto. This sequence is what pulls everyone together in the second game. Ellie has distanced herself from Joel, which you discover as you go, and Abby, the second playable character, kills Joel as revenge, seeing as one of the surgeons was her father.
Abby.
No!
Abby, don't look.
Dad! Dad! No! No!
Revenge is the theme of the day here, with a bunch of circular narrative devices used throughout the game. It handles revenge and the cycle of violence as well as it does about anything else mature in this game, which is to say that Naughty Dog need to stop making games where violence is their only interaction in the worlds that they're building. In the first game, Ellie was a character with some nuance and a little bit of depth, which is actually brought out in the first few hours of the game before Joel's demise. As soon as the plot devolves into her hunting Abby, all those things are thrown out of the window. Any layers, introspection, and work done previously, all of this is thrown out. There's no reason to care for Ellie, as she's reduced to one dimension, and any attempt to redeem a coupon of character progression is something that long expired when they decided that the only way for Ellie to interact with the world is via violence. Even when a hump in her and Dina's relationship appears, that Dina has gotten pregnant with her ex, Jesse, and the small thread of character interaction that Ellie might be concerned she's losing Dina, and as this is dangled, it's just tossed aside as you go on for more murder and revenge.
I heard you're sick.
Oh, it's just a stomach thing. Come on. Let's sit you down, huh?
You don't need to do that.
Oh, shut up. So when'd you leave Jackson?
Day after you, there was bad snow and I crossed into Oregon. I've been doing 18-hour stretches for the past 2 weeks trying to catch it.
There are two particular moments in the game where Ellie kills members of the group that killed Joel. The one that I want to focus on is Nora, a doctor that Ellie beats to death off-screen. Naughty Dog used their incredibly advanced motion capture and animation to show that Ellie's trauma after the fact. A little hand shaking in the rain. And motherfuckers, you can't do that. All I've done is burn, mutilate, and shoot people for the last 6 hours. You can't suddenly have Ellie feel for something on par for some of the casual murders she's already committed. It doesn't work that way. I think her melting someone with a Molotov cocktail or saying "you fucker" as someone drowns in their own lungs is proof enough that you can't use murder and torture as a character development plot anymore. Another thing they deploy in the game for the field and morality sort of stuff is giving names to all the enemies that you kill. Someone dies and you'll hear them call out for Colin. And I'm laughing hysterically during all of this because the NPCs are just that. They're NPCs, they're dime a dozen. They have a under the hood value attached to them as to how much damage they can take, and I'm landing critical hits from headshots and getting complimented on it by Dina. And as soon as I land that critical hit on Colin's fucking dome, eliminating him from the game and making my time easier, so why should I feel? It doesn't matter if these fuckers all have names because all I can do is kill them. There's no dialogue trees or pacifist route that I could cash in on later on, because when they die, I move on and the game does as well. Who gives a fuck about NPC Goon 57 and their dog that I just butchered? NPC Goon 58 and 59 are just about to get battered the same way. I just don't care and find it funnier and funnier every time that it happens.
You're dead!
They're trying to be super serious, but you'll have this really tense situation where, you know, people are closing in, you've just seen what this mysterious new faction can do and how evil they are, and you find a collectible. If it could stop being a video game for 5 minutes, it would be so much better. Games figured out how to not be video games all the time, but use the mechanics to tell a better, more nuanced and mature story years ago. And you're telling me that this massively rich, smart team couldn't grasp that putting a collectible system in their supposedly more mature game is stupid? It's also like with all the notes. Who's writing all these notes? Ellie's story is basically cut into segments. Halfway through, it stops the game and you're given this Kojima-esque Metal Gear Solid 2 switch. You begin to take control of Abby. Abby's section is, I would call it a delight in comparison to Ellie's, but, you know. The reason for this is it feels like they stopped bothering with the grey area stuff, the moralizing and trying to make a point about violence begets violence when all you can do is murder people. Abby is a soldier. She fights a faction called the Scars, and her arc is focused on the coming to terms that her morals need to change.
What are you doing? I'm giving her a chance.
You pick up on her living her day-to-day, getting burritos in the canteen and being sent on assignments. The Scars are treated as a direct threat with no middle ground to speak of. While Ellie's side shoves all the character building to the wayside in favour of gunning for the revenge plot, Abby's story actually takes this role on perfectly. You're given a massive insight into how the other half live, which does more to humanise the mindless goons you've been culling for the last 6 hours better than I expected. Abby goes from this person that was just the thing that killed Joel to an actual character with goals, relationships that are explored to the maximum, and how she copes with it until she begins to grasp that maybe she's been in the wrong all this time. Abby's story takes a left turn when she is captured by the Scars and is about to be lynched. She's rescued by a boy called Lev and his sister, which in turn changes her perspective on life. All she's known is that these Scars are delusional cults with a penchant for murder, not that they could possibly be anything more. After leaving the pair to recoup and heading back to her ex, she decides to help them out as they're clearly not all that she thought to be. The Last of Us 2 leverages trauma for its own personal goals of shock value. Druckmann can spout off how he was wanted to capture the lust for revenge or whatever, but it feels like inclusivity for morons. Lev is transgender. He's on the run after going against tradition, and the only one who understands is his sister. Naughty Dog pair you up with Lev and in a short time actually make a character that is intriguing because he's a child that has grown up in a cult-like environment with no outside world influence. There's no popular culture references, he doesn't know what cool means, and that sort of stuff. The relationship written between Abby and Lev adds some needed levity, whilst they're facing the perils of Abby's worst fear, heights, or, you know, a infested hotel. During this hotel sequence, you're ambushed by enemies that begin dead-naming Lev for zero reasons other than to ensure that everyone is on board with who Lev is, even though it is explained later in a way that is a little bit more sensitive. In the space of an hour, you're invoking lynching of people for cementing these are the baddies, and then utilising the mental anguish of a portion of your audience to ensure that your primary audience immediately knows that Lev is trans. It's grotty, and the thing that makes it even worse is that there's a gameplay benefit to it. You can use the call-outs of the dead naming to seek out the enemies as you go through this section. I don't feel a thirst for revenge. I think you're an idiot, leveraging the trauma of others to ensure that your product hits the targets for understanding so that a big portion of your audience doesn't have to think too hard. For a more in-depth look at the representation of Lev on screen, I highly recommend Pace Gaming's article on the matter by Waverly /@HotelBones on Twitter. So after all of this, all this maturity that it's tried to bring to the table, it transcends the norms and it does more for video games than anything in the world. It brings back a 3-hit boss fight. Seriously. It's like they couldn't be bothered how to, to figure out how to disguise this fight, even though they do it before and after this. There's a big mutant infected fight that's cool from a horror perspective, and even that just devolves into a typical run around a small area and shoot the boss until it's dead. Like I mentioned, Abby's half of the game feels better most of the time, outside of the 2 issues that I raised above. Circling back to the story, it ends in a way that I actually think undoes a lot of what they spent a fair while building. Ellie and Dina have moved to a farm, had the baby, and are happy.
Oh, no. This is kind of working on me. You're weird. I'm aware. Okay, you're distracting me.
No.
Oh, okay, all right, go.
Ellie's PTSD from the events of the game are taking their toll, and again, leveraging that style of trauma is handled in a way that I just thought these fuckers just couldn't help themselves. Ellie ditches happiness for resolving her issues with Joel's death, and Abby, who left Ellie and Dina alive, and rose above the cycle of revenge. Fine, whatever. Cool ending. The game then cuts to Abby and Lev seeking fireflies in California, before they're captured by the local bad guy group, and it adds nothing. In fact, it adds so little it makes me mad. A little bit of vein pops out the side of my face. The game has done nothing with the post-apocalypse genre. The whole game in terms of its message to the audience and stuff like that. Other than, hey, violence and revenge are bad. Great. Thanks, guys. It ends with Ellie returning to the house after months away seeking Abby, and everything she's built is gone. It's meant to be a gut punch of, wow, Ellie was the villain all along. But it's actually just a pessimistic view for the sake of more misery to leverage for more emotions. This game has been in development for at least the last 3 years. Naughty Dog has seen the world change in real time, and the only thing you could say to your now 4 million and growing audience is, hey, what's bad in the world is everyone's kind of shit, yeah? No message of hope, nothing. The whole segment in California again feeds into the inclusivity for morons. If an ending where Ellie and Dina remove themselves from society isn't enough to get across the message that things are fucked, then I don't know what you're expecting. Do you not trust your audience to grasp that there are no winners in your tale? Or do you need to cram in one more action sequence, animate muscle atrophy, crucifixion, mutilation to really hone in that message? Do you not trust your audience to think for themselves? Or feel for themselves? Apparently not. In a Wired article, it stated that Druckmann and the Naughty Dog team would spend hours bringing in scores of people to test the game, and then via scientific methods of filming reactions and filling out questionnaires to ensure that things were perfect to the narrative and gameplay beats. Audience feedback before something goes out isn't new. For video games or movies, even sometimes books and other media. And the changes are usually at the behest of the studio or publisher involved. Here it reads like Naughty Dog just wanted to ensure that every beat was up to this weird, gross product-like standard of trauma and misery. This scientific attitude absolutely kneecaps every moment of levity that I enjoyed, as I have no idea what was rewritten or redone to ensure that the right emotional response was pulled out of my brain. Was the birthday flashback crunched on when someone signed a piece of paper saying, hey, it was alright, or giving it a 6 out of 10 on their scorecard, causing Druckmann and his team to panic that the moment might not precisely do what they want? I like that sequence, but I have no idea if it came from a real place, or Naughty Dog's incessant need for perfection. Was it worth it to the investors and people keeping track of sales and Sony? Absolutely. 4 million units sold? I'd be fucking dancing around the room. To those in Naughty Dog's trenches and behind the desks, I worry for them. Reading interviews and articles about the culture of Naughty Dog screams to me that this third-person shooter with stealth and horror elements is not worth it. It's not game-changing, it's not even remotely as important as the previous game, as everything it tries to use for good, representation, female leads, has been done already and far better. Games dealing with heavier topics have figured out how not to do this at the end of a reticle, and also being better games as well. They made something that is the status quo while inflicting a disgusting culture of crunch on their studio to ensure that it gets done in a ridiculous time frame. Is this what the unhealthy management of Naughty Dog and the continued enforcement of crunch culture has deemed worthy of that? More than 12-hour days for something that is ultimately the status quo, down to the now needed inclusion of horse riding in the video games. Will they learn from their past mistakes, or is there now 4 million copies sold and critical reception just to signify that everything is fine, we're going to continue this way? Naughty Dog wants to be bigger than they actually are, and I don't mean in a sense of money. Of course, they want to be financially stable and prove to Sony that they can continue down this path, but everything the game does inside and out goes against this mentality. The continued use of crunch and trying to cover up sexual harassment in the workplace doesn't work anymore. Not in 2020. If your games are too big to be completed in a reasonable amount of time, maybe you're making the wrong types of games. Or maybe you need to work with your publisher to actually provide working conditions that won't potentially kill someone. The Last of Us 2 is not worth it. It does nothing and provides little to the world. It's a product that was tested and brutally squeezed out into the world for the enjoyment of the masses who will take its grim nature at face value. After everything and an ending that takes everything away, all I feel is for the team. There's a crunch environment, there's obviously some shady shit going on, and at the end of the day, their next big project will probably be managed the same way, and that's not worth it.